Hey students, welcome back. This is Torres, Elbow Bump. How are you? Are you doing okay? How's your family? Are they okay? Remember, if you need anything, please send me an email so that I can try to help in whatever way I can. So lucky you get to hear my voice for another lecture. But the best part is we're going to be learning about correlation versus causation. Yay! So I'm going to go ahead and read you this sentence and tell me what you think. It says, as ice cream sales increase, the rate of shark attacks sharply increases. Coincidence? So that must mean that ice cream causes shark attacks. It seems pretty silly when you say it this way. And this example may be extreme. However, when there is a correlation, you cannot automatically assume that what's happening on your independent variable is automatically affecting your dependent variable. Let's do a quick review of what we've learned about the axes of the Cartesian plane and where we plot certain variables. So here we have the coordinate system, right? We have the horizontal axis is the x-axis and the y-axis is the vertical axis. So we've got the x and the y. Another way that we can say x and y might be input and output. One can be independent variable and dependent variable. And in some cases, one can be the explanatory variable and the y can be the response variable. But when we get to cause and effect, that's where things get a little bit more muddled. Let's start by defining correlation. Correlation, as we've learned, tells us that two variables are related. The correlation coefficient, or R, can give us information about the strength of that relationship. So let's look at this particular scatter plot. This scatter plot is showing the relationship between the score of a student's first exam in a chemistry course versus their overall performance at the end of the semester. Here we can see that there is a positive trend, right? It's linear because we really only deal with linear. And the correlation coefficient is pretty high, 0.73. So we can say that there is a linear, positive, pretty strong relationship between how someone scores on the first exam and their performance in the course at the end of the semester. What's important here is that we stated that there was a relationship. Different types of relationships exist and can be reflected in correlations. There can be a causal relationship when we say that X is actually causing Y, or there can be a spurious relationship where X and Y are related, but the cause is actually another variable, let's say variable Z. Let's define causation. Causation indicates that the occurrence of one event has actually caused the occurrence of a second event. In these situations, there is a direct causal relationship. One is causing the other, and cause and effect can be attributed. However, if you do not have proper interpretation and proper experimental design, you should never assume that a correlation implies causation. Let's go back to our shark example. We read this earlier, and it says, as ice cream sales increase, the rate of shark attacks sharply increases. So that must mean that ice cream causes shark attacks. But without proper interpretation and experimental design, we can't assume this, right? This could just be a coincidence. So we talked about how this may seem extremely obvious and almost ridiculous, but there are a lot of examples that are not as obvious. Check out this media report. Vox says, want to live longer even if you're poor? Then move to a big city in California. Very catchy title. Somebody could read it and think, well, Vox isn't that bad. I mean, it's a pretty credible source. It's not the New York Times and it's not a medical journal, but maybe it has something to do with that. But when you look at the original research, it appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association. This is a very highly credible journal. And when they did their research, it just said the association, right? The relationship between income and life expectancy in the US. So they weren't saying that one caused the other, like the Vox media report stated. They're just saying that there might be an association between income and life expectancy. Their exact words said, although the correlational analysis in this study cannot establish causal mechanisms, it is a step towards determining which theories for disparities in longevity deserve further consideration. So they themselves said that one did not cause the other, but in the Vox headline, it kind of got a little bit more twisted. And it was catchy. We want to catch the attention of a reader. But then, too, we have to be very, very careful with our words that we don't suggest something that isn't actually happening. So back to our shark attack example. This is a spurious correlation, right? Because the ice cream isn't causing the sharks to attack, and the sharks aren't causing people to eat ice cream. But what's really happening is that there is this third variable, the heat, the sun. More people are going to the beach and getting into the water, and it's hotter, so they might want more ice cream. There is an other factor that might be involved in the relationship, but also that other variable isn't necessarily causal either. So just because it's hot doesn't mean you're going to get attacked by a shark. And just because it's hot, you're not going to necessarily eat ice cream. So there can be many things that are attributing to this. Okay, so here's another example. This one deals with infants and fans. It said fan in room seems to cut infants' risk of crib death. The finding published Monday in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine is the latest evidence to suggest that baby sleep environment is a critical factor in the risk of SIDS. We don't know necessarily what the truth said. If you actually go to the Archives of Pediatric and Adolescent Medicine, it says use of fan during sleep and the risk of sudden death infant syndrome. They were just looking to see if there was a relationship between room ventilation and the risk of SIDS. So in this situation, it's not saying that one is causing the other. It's just saying that the fan use during sleep was associated with 72% reduction. It's not saying that it caused that reduction. It just said that there was an association or relationship. Here's another example. Tooth loss and mental health in the elderly. Tooth loss in elderly linked to mental impairment. Here's another example. Diet of fish can prevent teen violence. What we want to do is really look at the credibility of the source and, if possible, go into the original study to see what experimental methods were used, what the study actually says, and just be very mindful that when publications or anyone is discussing, or even people that are speaking are discussing relationships, one does not necessarily cause the other. So how can we infer causation? Well, let's just do a quick review about the types of studies we can do in statistics. The first is an observational study. In an observational study, the researcher has completely removed themselves from the study and just observes behavior. So there is no interaction between the researcher and the subjects. What's happening is completely natural. It's happening on its own without the interference of any researcher or any factors whatsoever. If the researcher starts to get involved within the study and intentionally changes dynamics, then that would be called a designed experiment. A designed experiment gives you better results that are more credible. But sometimes we cannot use an experiment. We are left to only use observational studies. We use observational studies in cases where it's unethical or impossible to assign people to receive a specific treatment, and when certain variables are only inherent. It's something about the person, about the subject, cannot be randomly assigned. With observational studies, you can only imply association. You can never imply causation. So I want you to take a look at these advertisements. I believe they appeared in magazines. So the question whether smoking caused lung cancer was debated during the 50s, 60s, and 70s for a while. And there was all kinds of thoughts of whether there was a link between smoking and lung cancer. The first evidence came out in the 1950s, where the British Medical Journal suggested that there was a relationship between lung cancer and smoking. They wondered if cigarettes would cause lung cancer. If you want to take a look at this X-ray, all these circled pieces right here, all these little circles, show where there's lung cancer in the X-ray. Now, I can't see it, but maybe you can. Now, there was also the idea that perhaps genetics was both a cause for smoking and a cause of lung cancer. One of the scientists that strongly believed that there was a genetic cause was R.A. Fisher. So let's think about this in terms of a true experiment, a randomized trial. Because in order to imply causation, you need to do a true experiment where the subjects are randomly assigned into different conditions. But if you conduct a randomized study, a true experiment, you would have to take the population, and the blue people here are smokers and the green people here are non-smokers, and randomly assign them into groups of smokers and non-smokers. That's unethical. You can't force people to smoke just so that you can see what happens to them. So a true experiment is not possible for studying the link between cigarettes and lung cancer. The next best thing you can do is conduct an observational study. But remember, observational studies cannot imply causation, right? You need a true experiment. So here's the problem. So if you were to conduct an observational study, you would look at a group of people that are just smokers. They've decided to take up smoking on their own. And you would look at the people that are non-smokers and compare what's happening between them in terms of lung health. But the problem with this is that there could be another variable that is contributing to the study. There's more than one way that smokers and non-smokers actually differ. So this is still just a relationship. If they were to find a relationship between smoking and lung cancer or not smoking and lung cancer, it still cannot be considered an experimental design, and so you cannot imply causation. The goal is to compare like with like. So you could do something to control for genetic differences if you had something like identical twins, where one twin is a non-smoker and the other twin is a smoker, to see kind of what happens. But even that is sort of difficult to do. So it took a really long time for there to be enough evidence for the Surgeon General of the United States to advise against smoking. That didn't happen until about 10 years later in 1964, when there started to be a push to educate people about the risks of smoking. My point is there had to be a lot of evidence before someone could actually state that smoking has a causal relationship with lung cancer, that smoking causes lung cancer. There's a very high threshold of proof. So just for fun, let's just look at some more lighthearted correlations here. So here is a correlation. It's a very high correlation. The R is 0.95. So it's a very strong negative correlation. And this correlates people who drowned after falling out of a fishing boat with the marriage rate in Kentucky. The incorrect assumption would be that marriage causes drowning. Here's another one. This correlates the consumption of mozzarella cheese, so how much mozzarella cheese is eaten, with how many civil engineering doctorates are awarded. And the correlation again is very high. It's got a 0.958 correlation. And we can see here that's a positive trend here, very highly correlated. So the correlation here, if we were to assume causation, we would say that eating a lot of cheese will get you a civil engineering Ph.D. which again is just ridiculous. So when you are looking at correlations and you're investigating a relationship, always consider that there could be a spurious correlation occurring. To summarize, correlation does not necessarily imply causation. A strong correlation is not evidence of a cause and effect relationship. So when you're writing about it, do not use words like causes, makes, will, because when you're working with a regression analysis to base your conclusions. You can use words that say predict or tends, on average. So it lets the reader know that this is not a cause, but only a relationship exists. So what's the big idea? Today's big idea is that the line of best fit is the line which is created by minimizing the residuals and describes the trend of the data. The equation that describes the line of best fit can be interpreted to describe the scenario in context. Correlation can only describe a relationship, but it cannot attribute cause and effect. In order to attribute cause and effect, the relationship must be examined by credible stakeholders using appropriate experimental methods and must be reproducible in future trials. So that's it for today. With that said, don't forget to check your emails, check Blackboard, do your homework, and subscribe to this channel. Even better, hit that notification bell so you know when there are new videos for this course. Okay? This is your teacher, Taurus, saying stay safe, and I will be waiting to give you a virtual elbow bump in the next video. Ciao!